We have somebody else on the phone, 416
It's Carolyn.
7985.
Okay, it's Carolyn Egan.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi there.
Okay, everybody on the phone, I'm hoping you can mute yourselves because if I mute you, then I will have no way of finding out that you actually want to speak and to bring you back onto the agenda. So if you can mute yourself, unmute yourself when you need to speak, that would be excellent. And I'm hoping everybody else is going to mute themselves as well. I see John here, so I don't, I think we're going to probably start at 7:30 on the dot as expected. But if you're joining late, I would just ask you to rename yourself on the, when you click on the participants, you can either find your name over there, or if you see your Zoom little window, nobody, I'm not Zoom call. If you click on your own picture, there's a 3 dots, dot, 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 click on that and rename yourself to have your full name and your local, so that we know who you are. And if you have guests, like Jeff Irons does, who's waving at us, good to see them. And Josh Moraes also has a guest. Wow, that's a cute guest. Welcome.
Mohammed, do you want to talk to people about how to use the reactions buttons?
The reactions are just thumbs up and clapping. So if you feel like you need to react to something, that would be appropriate for you to use there. But the most used function that you're going to have is the raise hands, because that's how we're going to create the speakers list. So John's going to go off the raise hands function in order to be able to see you want to speak. So once again, if you're joining just a little bit late, I just remind people to make sure that you turn off your audio so that you mute yourself and until the time is necessary for you to unmute yourself, as well as when you rename yourself. So where it says Josh Moraes, it says Josh Moraes, comma, the Canadian Labour Congress or CLC. Thank you, Josh. So that we can get your attendance.
I know, I see 400.
So once again, just reminding everybody to mute themselves.
Yeah.
Hi, Carlos.
Yeah.
Welcome. If there's anything that you need during the chat function, please just throw it in there. If you have any questions in regards to process or whatnot, I think that will be probably best there. And then if you need to get on the speakers list, raise your hand as thing. Otherwise, please make sure you keep yourself on mute at all times, and please rename yourself on your Zoom thing so that we know your full name for attendance purposes. And I think we'll flip it over to John now to start the meeting.
We're just going to hold off for another minute while people are getting ready.
Okay, I'll remind people again to make sure you mute your speaker so that we don't hear you all the time, and that it'll protect the sound quality for everybody else, as well as please rename yourself so that we can see you as Kingsley Kwok / Kingsley Kwok / OPSU, so we know what local you are as well, and that would be appreciated. It's just for attendance purposes.
Well, good evening, sisters and brothers. Welcome to the Labour Council's second virtual Delegates meeting. Want to welcome you all. I know this is difficult times for everybody, but there's an awful lot happening in our city, in our country, in our society. So I want to thank you all. And again, as we said last time, thank you for your patience, because we have a great team that's making this happen, but the chair is always going to make a bunch of mistakes. And so I'm letting you know that in advance and hoping that people will bear with us. We still have people coming on, so wait another moment before we start.
I'll also just say that if you want to focus on the speaker, on the top right hand side, you'll see an icon that says speaker view. You can click on that, or there's like 9 dots. You can click on that for gallery view. So if you want to see everybody at the same time, that's gallery view. If you want to see just the speaker speaking so you can focus on what they're saying, click on speaker view, and then whoever is speaking at the time, or whoever has not muted their mic, they will pop up on the screen. We have a new edition of 647-407-7759. Who would that be?
It's Joy. You didn't mute. I thought I was muted. I'm not muted?
Oh.
Hello?
No, you're not muted, Joy, but I got you.
Okay, all right. I can mute myself right now.
Please and thank you.
Okay, so we're going to start the meeting, and people are coming in, but we have an awful lot on the agenda tonight, and we've got a lot of great people that are joining us. We'll start. The attendance is being done, roll call is being done virtually, so we don't have to have Abdi read that out. But we will start with a harassment statement. Jennifer. Is Jennifer there?
Do that up and sending someone a link to our meeting.
Okay, well, we're waiting for Jennifer. Just want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit and subject to the Dish with One Spoon Treaty between the Anishinaabe and Mississaugas and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share this territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Jennifer, are you ready to read the harassment statement?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Mutual respect, cooperation, and understanding are strongly held principles of the trade union movement. We will neither condone nor tolerate harassing or discriminatory behavior that creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment and undermines the dignity or self-esteem of any individual. An injury to one is an injury to all. Speech or conduct which is racist, sexist, homophobic, or discriminatory in any way is unacceptable to trade unionists and only serves to divide us. Our policies and practices must reflect this commitment to equality as we work together for justice and dignity in our workplaces, our unions, and our communities.
Thanks, Jennifer. So in a minute, we're going to recognize and think about those who've been stricken by the COVID virus. The nurses union is obviously on the front lines of so much of this, and Carolyn Edgar, who's been a long-time delegate to our Labor Council from the nurses in North York Hospital, is not able to join us tonight, but she did want to ask us to recognize that next week, which is Nursing Week, May the 11th to 17th, is also something that they are celebrating. It's the 200th bicentenary, 200th birth of Florence Nightingale. And the International Year of the Nurse and Midwife recognizes Nightingale as a founder of modern nursing who led the way for improvements in infection control, healthier living, and working environments. And if any of you are interested, the nurses across Canada are celebrating this anniversary of her birth on May 12, 1820, at a website called nightingale2020.ca. It is really quite a remarkable story of, we often say there are heroes in our world. She's bigger than life, and a lot of her leadership was about challenging the incredible patriarchy of those days in literally thousands and thousands and thousands of lives. So I wanted to acknowledge the leadership of somebody like Florence Nightingale. But we've lost a number of frontline workers in the healthcare sector, members of CUPE, members of SCIU, and of course, hundreds of people, whether they're living in long-term care or from different walks of life, including grocery workers. And we'd like everybody to take a moment now, pause in a moment of silence for those who've been stricken with this terrible tragedy. Thank you. Thank you. So Mohammed, you're going to just remind people about the Zoom processes, including the chat function.
Yeah, so if I can just remind everybody to make sure that you are muting yourself. I mean, we can mute you centrally, but we would prefer you not have to do that. So please mute yourself, and this way it'll protect the sound quality for everybody else. The second thing I want to say is please change your name. So there's a way to rename yourself. So if you either go on the participants, click on participants, you find yourself, you hover the mouse over it, it'll give you an option to rename. Or if you find your video little box on the screen, you can click on yourself. There's 3 dots there, and you can just rename yourself. Put your full name, like Mohammed Hashim, and your union, so that we can keep a record of who's here and who's not. The second thing is the chat function is open. So if there's information that you want to, say hi to everybody or make a comment about something, please feel free to use that chat function as an ongoing discussion point. If you need to raise your hand, that's the way we're going to keep a speakers list. So in order to make sure that we're not just trying to monitor everybody putting their hand up, there's a function on either your phone or your laptop or your iPad, whatever you're logging in from, where you can raise your hand, and that'll put you on the speakers list, and John will just go from the top to the bottom in order to make sure that there's a process that's followed. Other than that, please keep yourself mute and only unmute yourself. There's a couple of people that have joined recently who I don't have in terms of attendance. So for 416-629-5678, who would that be? Okay, we'll figure that out afterwards then. Back to you, John.
So we have the minutes of this meeting have been circulated by email earlier today. And we've got a motion to move and second those minutes. I'm looking for errors or omissions. There is one omission that I've got by text about the voting on full agreement, so we'll change those dates. Is there any other omissions that anybody, or errors that anybody sees? If not, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor of endorsing the minutes as circulated. Okay, we're going to move to credential report. And we have that motion supported. Credential report, Doug, are you able to provide that? Or David?
Yes, as of Thursday, May 7th, 2020, credential report. IATC Local 58, 3 delegates. Sheet Metal Local 30, 6 delegates. YUSA, 7 delegates. I so move.
Great. So that motion is to accept the credential report. I guess we'll take a vote on that, if you can put up. And while we're doing that, I just want to welcome the president of the Montreal Labor Council has joined us on the call tonight, Marc-Edouard Joubert, a good friend from the FTQ in Montreal. Welcome, Marc-Edouard, and a proud postal worker as well.
Bonsoir, bonsoir.
They're trying to figure out whether or not they want to risk having a virtual meeting. And so Marc-Edouard is monitoring us to see how we're doing on this one. So next we're going to introduce a video clip that Mohammed has been involved in called Voices from the Front Lines. And I'll turn it over to Mohammed to introduce it, and then we'll have a video clip.
Sure, thanks, John. So, I mean, this pandemic has been a really difficult time for all of us, but most definitely for people who are working on the front lines. So what we tried to do at the Labor Council is to try to find how do we tell their stories? Like, what are the sacrifices that they're making? What are the things that they're seeing in their workplace? How are they dealing with it? How is their family dealing with it? Do they feel supported? Do they not? Because we wanted to document this moment in time for people, because it's a moment of incredible sacrifice and bravery and courage by a lot of people who are out there doing the work that they are to ensure that the rest of our society functions. So our first episode was on healthcare, and we had 3 guests. We had one person who was a long-term care nurse from SCIU Local 1, SCI Healthcare. We had a respiratory therapist from OPSU, that's Kingsley Quox Local, and we had a paramedic from Local 416. And they talked about all the difficulties that they're finding in healthcare, and it was an incredible amount of courage that they're, one of the persons that even talked about being a respiratory therapist, where she's hooking people up like with ventilators to make sure that they can breathe once they've been infected. And a moment of inspiration that she shared was when that kept her going was when they take out the ventilator, because that person can breathe again. And all the hospital staff come together and applaud that moment, because it's a moment where somebody actually beat the pandemic, and they want to applaud that. So we've been taking these stories and just putting microphones in front of incredibly brave workers, and it's been every single Wednesday for the last 2 Wednesdays, and the previous episodes are available on YouTube as well as on Facebook. So please go check them out over there. Our next episode is going to be on Wednesday at 1 o'clock, not 2 o'clock next week. And I ask you all to tune into that. And we're going to have 3 people there. We're going to have a member of ATU Local 113 named Ed Cunningham. We have a QP Local 79 member named Camilla Brown, I believe. And she is working in the shelter system right now, which we all know is incredibly stressed. And we have an elementary teacher from York Owecta who's going to talk about what e-learning and not being in the classroom looks like. And then we'll have the presidents of all the locals. We're going to have Carlos Santos from ATU 113. We're going to have Philomena from York Owecta, and we're going to have the unit chair for shelters, Caroline from Local 79. So I just ask you to, it's a really incredible opportunity to engage with people in the front line and hear what they're seeing and feel what they're feeling as well. And I would just encourage you to join in on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, depending on which week it is. But next week is going to be 1 o'clock, and we'll go from there. I think Susan, you have some clips that you're going to run.
I'm going to play the clips in a second. Just let me get my screen share up.
Thanks, Skylar. We're living in an unprecedented time where all our routines have been disrupted, and it's hard to make sense of what is happening around us. We have heard from politicians and health officials on what to do and what not to do. We have taken their advice and tried our best to be safe, not only for ourselves, but to protect others. However, As the pandemic advances, we are starting to see the impact of the decisions that policymakers have made. Some of them have been good, some of them have not. So in order to figure out how to make sense of the impact of these decisions, we decided to start this series called Voices from the Front Line. Because as a Labor Council and the Broadband Institute as a partner of the labor movement, we know that the perspectives of those most directly dealing with it all are some of the most important. You're a respiratory therapist. You're intubating people. Are you getting enough PPE?
For now, fortunately, yes. There's always a constant battle of enough N95s and enough yellow gowns and shields and whatnot. And we are having to reuse our N95s and shields. We're taught how to wipe them down and put them in these sort of safe bags. And so, yeah, we are reusing our N95s for the day. Especially during these aerosol generating procedures. And I know some of my coworkers have also left their families. They're paying for Airbnbs and hotels because they don't want to spread the virus to their wife or kids or their parents. So they're now paying for separate living quarters, which is kind of unfortunate because they're working to pay for their Airbnb basically. There have been some inspiring moments, and I have to say the most rewarding thing out of this all is seeing a patient get better. Yeah, we're applauding those people who have actually fought the disease.
We clap for them.
Yeah, we clap for them, and we talk about our successes. Like, yes, we have this amount of patients, but we've also had this amount of patients who have successfully fought the disease and are now off our ventilators, and that's an amazing success. We should all be proud of that because that's a great thing.
As of last year, 2019, 56% of the registered practical nurses in Ontario work part-time. Now, that should 56%. 56%. That's more than half of the registered practical nurses who are in situations like Jocelyn and Joy, who have to go from job to job. And, precarious work is not something that I think the public or the government connects to the nursing profession. But when it comes to registered practical nurses and it comes to good jobs with good wages where you don't have to work 130 hours in a pay period, that's really the systemic.
What we have seen now is unions have to go to the Ontario Superior Court or directly to the Ontario Labor Relations Board to order employers to provide personal protective equipment. We are seeing that we need to really strengthen Joint Health and Safety Committee to have these committees speak up and support workers because, like Jackie said, the employers are treating work refusals as insubordination. And so it's, and really reprising against workers. So these are principles that union activists are directly opposing what we are learning in our worker health and safety courses, right? So that's what employers are doing, and we now have to go to the court to do it. British Columbia paid better wages and took over long-term care personal support workers a lot earlier. Quebec asked the federal government for the Army to intervene way earlier than Ontario. All Ontario has done is ask the Army to help out in only five long-term care homes. We, as Jackie said, we need more workers, and we're still seeing Ontario lagging behind other provinces.
Today's episode is about a number of people who are, many times, invisible to society, but now they're deemed essential. I use the term invisible because I've been talking to people within the services sector, and many of them feel invisible, unheard, and sometimes taken for granted. Tell me about what it looks like working in grocery stores right now.
So right at the beginning, we had to fight for PPE to be given to us. At my location, there's probably been over 10 infections at my location, including myself. And it's very scary because we are just being exposed to this virus that we don't really know a lot of. My union has been so incredible during this time, and every single person has like reached out to me, including my union president, whereas my work has not reached out to me. So you can see the difference right there and how one feels valued. So I feel definitely appreciated and supported by my union. I'm working at trying to stay well and keeping my lungs clear. But I also want to fight for my other workers who have to be at work right now, and their safety isn't being, taken seriously.
You're at home, offset with COVID-19, and your thoughts are, how do I protect my fellow coworkers?
Yes. Anyone who knows me know I'm a huge activist, so that's not very far fetched for me right now. I'm really angry. I'm very angry with how things have been, and I'm not like happy with things, and I don't want other people to keep getting sick when it could be prevented.
So Amazon, what they have is it's a point system that penalizes employees for lateness, absences, or other reasons. So if someone acquires like 6 points in a short period of time, the employee is first asked for the explanation, or sometimes they are just terminated. And now if they are not feeling well and they decide not to go to work because workers don't want to make others sick, not only they are staying home unpaid, but they will be pointed. These are the workers who are playing an important role in fulfilling the needs of the rest of society at this moment. They are trying their best to be there for the workers for the other people who could be vulnerable to this illness, who are at high risk. So they are playing an integral role to keep the things rolling, but they are putting themselves at risk. And all they get is this false praise that they are our heroes, right? They should have the working conditions, or at least the wages that should reflect that.
I saw all of the food delivery company statements about COVID, Foodora, Uber, DoorDash, Skip, and they all kind of came out with the same bullshit plan. And the plan was basically like, if you get sick, we'll compensate you based off your income that you made from this app. The thing is, firstly, you got to get sick, which I think is like a big red flag. How about trying to prevent people from getting sick? How about offering PPE for those workers, How about, some actual guidelines for how to do this? How about enforcing the condos do no contact delivery? The service it's about more than just getting your food delivered. It's about you paying to not take the risk.
Talking about the gig economy and the gig economy workers. This COVID actually exposed the imperialist system and the minute workers, basically, who is just living day by day, project by project, one by one, like day in, day out. Like, that 1% of the Canada is controlled by 99% wealth is controlled by 1%, and that's not acceptable.
Well, great. That's very impressive. Please go back and you can look at that on our YouTube channel, or you can also check it out on next Wednesday at 2 o'clock and the following Wednesday. Look at people from other sectors. We're going to introduce our keynote speaker in a moment, but first I just want to recognize that ATU Canada President John Danino has joined us tonight, and along with Carlos, President 113. So welcome, and I know we have many others. I'm going to, I'm just saying that the episode starts at 1 o'clock this Wednesday instead of 2. So we are very honored tonight to have one of Canada's leading labor economists, Jim Stanford. Jim was an economist with the auto workers for many Unifor for a number of years, and then he went to Australia and helped to create a research foundation working very, very closely with the labor movement on Australia, the Center for Future Work. And Jim is back in Vancouver now. And they're actually this week, starting a Canadian office, working in partnership with the Center for Policy Alternatives and the Atkinson Foundation. And Jim is going to give us a presentation that he calls Off the Cliff. And it's a bit of an outline of what's going on with the economy. We've heard about people on the front lines, the health impacts of COVID, and now we're going to get to hear about the economic impacts of this, and then we'll have a chance for some questions and answers with Jim. So I'm hoping that Jim can join us now. And
hello, John. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed, Jim.
Excellent. Very nice to be with you, John, and the members of your delegates tonight. And I'm really proud of the work that your Labor Council is doing, including just continuing to meet during this pandemic. That's very important in its own right. So I'm really, really proud to be with you tonight, and thank you for what you're doing. I'm going to show a few slides to guide my presentation here, and then we'll have some time for some questions and answers at the end of that. So stand by here. Let me just make sure that, can you see the title slide? Can you give me the thumbs up if you do? Yep. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so as John mentioned, I am working at the Center for Future Work. So there's the website for our Canadian office of our center, and my Twitter handle and the center's Twitter handle. You're more than welcome to tweet from the presentation tonight if you'd like. We have actually just opened this Canadian office of the Center for Future Work. We have been doing this work down in Australia, where I was until this year, and now we've gone global, if you like, creating a Canadian office for it, and we'll be jumping into the Canadian debates. And what a time for those Canadian debates! Wow. Just to give some perspective on where we're at in terms of this pandemic and the impacts on workers and incomes. This is a bit of history. This shows you what the 1990 to 91 recession looked like in Canada. That was what we called the free trade recession. Some of you might remember it. We had very high interest rates. We had a whole wave of plant closures because of the free trade agreement. Very painful time. And you'll see the recession there. Canada's GDP, the total value of our output, declined for a couple of years by about 3 or 4% cumulatively. And then we ended up in a slow and gradual recovery. Just to give you a sense, this is what the current crisis looks like. This is something of a totally different magnitude. We're looking at a sharper, much steeper drop in the total value of output from Canada's economy, the output that's produced by workers producing goods and services. And the key question for us is what comes next? Are we going to be able to claw our way back to something like a normal economy where workers and families can support themselves? Or are we going to get stuck in something that looks like a depression? So that just gives you an immediate sense of the drama of the potential catastrophe that we're facing. I think of the old Roadrunner cartoons. Do you remember that? When the coyote is chasing the Roadrunner, runs right off a cliff and hangs there for a minute, and then looks down. You know, the coyote only falls when he starts looking down. And right now, our economy is looking down, and we're in for a very rough ride. And it's really important that the union movement be the organized voice for workers as we go through this. What's happening, of course, it's unlike any other recession in Canada's history. We've actually deliberately shut down entire parts of the economy because of the safety and health issues. Any of the consumer-facing sectors of our economy, anything where you have face-to-face contact or hands-on contact with customers, including retail, hospitality, and other services, transportation, has been closed. And that immediately has an enormous impact on jobs and on incomes and on output. But it doesn't stop there, of course. It automatically spills over into other parts of the economy. If retail stores aren't doing business and selling stuff, then they're not going to replace their stocks from the wholesale sector. And the wholesale sector isn't going to replace its stocks from the manufacturing sector. So it's that old thing in our economy where one thing leads to another. And in this case, it's all the worse because of the disruption of international supply chains because of the limits on travel. Imagine closing the Canada-US border to all but essential traffic. You know, until this happened, people probably didn't think it was even possible, but that's exactly what's happened. So then we'll get the other chain reactions that always happen in a recession. Consumers don't have income, they're worried about the future, so they stop spending, businesses stop investing, and you end up in the soup. We are looking at probably the loss of 2 to 3 million jobs in Canada. There will actually be a labor force report tomorrow from Statistics Canada, and we'll see the unemployment rate shooting up towards 20%. The official unemployment rate is really not the whole story either. Many of you will know that the way we calculate unemployment in Canada is kind of misleading. To qualify as officially unemployed, you have to not only not work, you have to be actively seeking work and available for work. And right now, there's nothing to seek for. So there may be lots of people who are not working. They may even still be on the rolls with their employer, but may not show up as officially unemployed. So the numbers we get tomorrow are going to be bad. We'll definitely see unemployment in the double digits, but even that won't tell the whole story. We're probably looking at a decline in GDP of 10 or 20% in this quarter, starting the April, May, June quarter. Obviously, losses of incomes for workers, families, businesses, other organizations like unions, of course, are having to grapple with this. And we have never experienced this. In this sense, the speed and depth of what's happening is worse even than the 1930s. Our challenge as a country is going to be to stop it from becoming a decade-long depression and take the aggressive, active measures that's going to be required to rebuild the economy and put people back to work. And I'll talk about that in the presentation. Just for, you know, they say misery loves company. Well, we've got company. This is the list of all the industrial countries in the world and the expected forecast from the OECD about how far their economy is going to shrink in this quarter. And they're expecting a 23% decline in Canada. It's not the worst of all the countries, but obviously not the best. And everyone is experiencing this terrible contraction. This is some work from my colleague at the Center for Policy Alternatives, David McDonald, who's been calculating how many people are registered for the CERB, as it's called, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. And 37%, so more than 1 in 3 people who were working in February are now registered for the CERB. That doesn't necessarily mean they're officially unemployed, but it probably means they're not working. So again, we'll get more light on the subject tomorrow with the official unemployment rate. But this is going to be a moving target. The government has clearly recognized that we are in an emergency situation, and both the federal government, the provinces and cities have stepped up with all kinds of measures. Some of them better than others, and obviously we've heard already tonight about some of the cracks in the response of the different governments, particularly around health and safety for workers in essential services. We have seen some dramatic moves to expand income supports for people who lose jobs, and that's positive. I never dreamed I would see the day when the Prime Minister of the country would stand up and announce a new $73 billion social program. You know, it's just incredible. And then other programs that cost a couple billion here and a couple billion there. So clearly they've recognized that we have to pull out all the stops in terms of helping workers, families, businesses get to the other side of this shutdown without collapsing entirely. And the idea of the CERB, that wage subsidy, is to try and keep people connected to their employers so that when we're allowed to get back to work safely, that can happen quickly. Another really important part of the government response has been the active use of the Bank of Canada, our central bank, which controls interest rates and oversees the financial system, and has been given new responsibility to help to try to stabilize financial markets and to directly purchase large amounts of government bonds. And this is so that we can use the central bank, which is owned by the people. We can use a central bank to help create the funds and support the lending that's required for government to do all that spending that they've announced. Other targeted measures have been implemented as well. Now, this is not a kind of bread and butter sort of normal recession, and it's not going to be a normal cyclical recovery either. This is something we've never seen before, and I think it's really important for the union movement and other social movements to be out front demanding a very, very ambitious and sustained program to reconstruct Canada's economy when this is over. The traditional tools of sort of macroeconomic counter-cyclical management, things like a bit of economic stimulus, here and a little bit of spending there are not going to do the trick when you look at the sort of decline in employment and GDP that I described earlier. The private sector in particular is going to be in shock. It already is in shock. Consumers are in shock, and businesses are going to be in shock in terms of their revenue loss and their fear for what comes next. And there's no way that businesses are going to start putting billions of dollars of investment on the table in order to get the economy going when they don't know what's coming next, either from the health side or from the economic side. And this is where I think we need to think of it as a post-war rebuilding plan. It's like we're in a war right now, a war against coronavirus. And when we fought World War II, we came out of the war. We had a big government debt, but we also recognized that government still had a big job to do to lead the process of post-war reconstruction and recovery and get growth going again. And it did that very well. And we're going to need the same thing this time. I've called it like a Marshall Plan, for those that remember any of the history after World War II, many years of government-led spending to reconstruct the economies in Western Europe and elsewhere. And we're going to need something like that, a peaceful Marshall Plan that will involve large amounts of government spending on infrastructure to repair and strengthen the health system. Obviously, the long-term care system was the weak link in our whole system, and it's going to require billions of dollars to prepare and repair that system, to bring it under the Medicare umbrella, to lift the quality of service and jobs, and so on. Other public infrastructure investment in transportation and energy and housing. And we're going to need a permanent expansion of public services. There's no way that private firms are going to rehire all of the people who've been put down or laid off or stood down at this moment. We're going to need government directly and through public agencies and through human services and caring services to put millions of Canadians back to work for a long period of time. So this is a chance in a way to shift the key driver of our economy away from private profit, instead start to organize our reconstruction around the need for taking care of ourselves and our communities after this terrible pandemic. The question that's obviously asked all over the place, and we're hearing more and more of the debt hawks and the deficit hawks coming out of the closet right now, how is government going to pay for all this? We have seen a dramatic increase in deficits. It's expected the federal deficit this year alone will be $250 billion. So that's a lot by any standards. Provincial deficits are also going to be large. Municipal governments are in terrible straits because they, in many cases, don't even have the legal right to run a deficit. So they're being forced, unless we get some kind of municipal aid package, they're being forced to downsize services and payrolls when in fact we need to be increasing them. This increase in debt should not be a worry for us. There's things in life to worry about right now. Our loved ones and washing our hands and keeping our jobs. The debt is not something we should worry about. First of all, the debt is the flip side of the coin, that the government is doing what it needs to do. This is how we pay for dramatic interventions to protect ourselves and our economy. And again, to use that post-war analogy from before, we finished World War II with a much bigger debt, 130% of our GDP. Right now, the federal debt is 30% of GDP. The provinces have another 30% of GDP, so that's 60% combined. We might get to 100% in the next couple of years, but that's nothing to lose sleep about. First of all, the interest rates are at zero or even below zero in real terms relative to inflation. The Bank of Canada correctly has been instructed to go out and buy government bonds, including provincial government bonds, which is new, and keep interest rates near zero and allow governments to borrow. And there's other things that can be done to manage that debt. In the end, when we come through this, the only thing holding back what we can do as an economy to reconstruct after the pandemic is our ability to get back to work and produce the goods and services that we need to. And until everyone who can work and wants to work is back to work, debt is the last thing that we should be worried about. One thing that we'll have to be gearing up to fight, is to resist the calls for austerity that are going to come from the usual sources as soon as the health emergency is over. So it's clear what we need to do. I think we are fighting a war. Immediately, we have to pour all the resources we can into that war, the health response and protecting people and keeping the health system working and addressing the crisis in long-term care and elsewhere. Keep people on the job where we can and attached to their employers, and provide income support for people so households don't go under. Once the immediate health emergency ends, then we have to shift into a whole vision. And this is going to last for years, if not decades, to reconstruct our economy, led by government investment and government expansion of human and caring services and direct public payrolls. We're going to have to do it that way because the private sector is not going to be able to lead us out of this recovery. No doubt this is an incredible time, and I'm struck by the courage of the workers like the ones that we heard earlier, and the courage and determination of their unions to defend workers and prevent employers and the government from shifting the burden onto our backs. This is a challenging time. There's lots of risks, but if we look at history, there's many times in history where working people responded to moments of crisis and actually came out of it stronger. Because working people suddenly remember why they need a union at their back, and working people understand that there's more important things than private profit and competitiveness. Right now, the most important thing is organizing our economy so that people can work to protect each other, protect our communities, and get that economy going back. So I think if we're organized and ambitious, we can actually come out of this crisis stronger than we went in. And I'm really glad to be back here in Canada to be part of it. So, John, thank you and your delegates for all that you're doing. And if you have time, I'm very glad to try to take a few questions here.
Yeah, we have time for a couple of minutes. If people want to put their hand up, then I guess Susan is going to look after David Kidd. I see you. David, go ahead.
Jim, great to see you. Great work.
Thank you, David.
I just have a question. In 1946 and 47, both corporate tax rates and tax rates on wealthy individuals were much higher than they've been for many times. I appreciate your comments on ignoring the debt, but that's also the way that the debts were paid off after World War II. There was a bigger giving by another sector of our economy that since Wilson and Turner has not paid their share. And we've been calling for tax reform for a long time. Just to tell me your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. First of all, we actually did not really pay off the debt after World War II. And in fact, we definitely didn't pay off the debt. The debt was still there and just got rolled over. What happened was that the economy grew very quickly and incomes rose and the debt shrank as a share of GDP. It was really the denominator, if I can use a mathematical analogy, that was doing the work. We never paid off that debt. We, in fact, continued to add to it because the governments ran much smaller deficits, but consistent deficits during the 50s and 60s and 70s. Our tax system, in a way, was certainly fairer then in terms of more tax raised from corporations and high-income individuals. On the other hand, our tax base is much bigger now than it was then. We did grow the overall tax base, and that's what allows us to fund a much bigger social program network of social programs today than we had in the 50s, and we built that during that period. I'm obviously on board with the need to reform the tax system. I frankly would advise staying away from making the argument that we need to increase taxes, even on corporations, in order to pay off this debt. Because first of all, it reinforces the idea that the debt is somehow a problem. And secondly, I think the crucial thing is to have the people get back to work after the pandemic. In the long run, if we want to expand the network of programs that government provides, and we do, then we are going to have to raise more revenue. And that's where expanding and making fairer the tax base will come in. But in the short run, increasing taxes, even for wealthy people, actually reduces spending power in the economy and would slow down the immediate recovery. So while I support progressive tax reform as a long-run structural goal, as an immediate response to this emergency, I don't think it's our most powerful argument. I think our most powerful argument is to say government has to mobilize the resources any way it can to meet immediate needs and put people back to work.
Nice. Clifton from Carpenter's. You have your hand up?
Yes. I heard you said we should be very vigilant to resist the call always for the powers that be to try to impose austerity on us. And we've seen in 2008 where I don't think we've recovered from all those concessions that we made in terms of wages and percentages that we could ask for in terms of wage increase. So, and we also saw that where the powers that be used or fight for our own rights and kind of demonize us, pit us against each other, do a lot of different strategies. Do you have any suggestion in terms of, for example, staying ahead of the curve in terms of trying to make our voices be heard in a way that the general public does not turn against union and say we are the bad people? It is kind of we've seen it happen in 2008 where we gave tons of concessions, and yet up till now I don't think we're able to negotiate properly to get a decent wage increase just because of that.
Jim, and then Helen Kennedy be next. Jim.
Clifton, you're 100% right that we have to be on guard against attempts to demonize workers and divide workers. And of course, we know where that's going to go in terms of fostering racism and division and anti-immigrant sentiment and so on. So we've got to be on guard for that, to say that, you know, workers can't be blamed for this and wages can't be blamed for this. We have an opportunity because the public standing of workers, including doing essential functions in obviously the healthcare system, but across the public sector and private sector workers, such as retail workers and drivers and so on, people suddenly understand that these people are risking their lives to perform essential functions and deserve more, not less. So I think that we've got a lot in our on our side to make the argument that higher wages will be part of the solution, and that cutting wages and cutting conditions will only make it worse. By the way, in the 1930s, the powers that be argued that if unemployment was 30%, and if workers cut their wages, that would reduce the price of labor and put everyone back to work. And of course, it was bullshit, you know, to use the technical term in economics. It was bullshit, and cutting wages only made it worse because it meant there was even less spending power in the economy. And we can argue, I think, very forcefully that workers have a moral claim to better wages given the risks that they're experiencing, and an economic claim to higher wages because that will help us recover after this pandemic.
We've got time for probably a couple more questions. If you're on the phone, you can, or otherwise you can raise your hand, and I've got Helen Kennedy up next. Helen?
Hi, actually, it's John Humphrey.
Oh, hi, John. Okay. She's
my better part. From the Steelworkers. I wonder, Jim, what you think the likely impact of this thing is going to be on NAFTA, and what should we as a trade union movement be looking for in terms of our demands for the international trade arrangements that Canada's involved in, specifically for Canadian manufacturing?
Oh, that's a great question, John. Very timely. I mean, who would have thought we'd hear Doug Ford stand up and say, we're going to make all this stuff ourselves in Canada instead of getting, you know, screwed over by Trump, as we did when he you know, tried to blockade the essential supplies coming our way. There's another shift in consciousness that's happened where Canadians realize it's not, it's less important to get something cheap via imports than it is to be able to make it ourselves for essential supplies, but for all kinds of other stuff as well. So I do think we've got an opportunity to make an argument for revitalizing Canadian manufacturing, and we've seen some important initiatives around that way. So part of that reconstruction plan that I talked about is going to have to involve recognizing that we have to be able to produce a wider array of all kinds of stuff in Canada, and that domestic manufacturing has to be one of the central elements. That's how it happened after World War II. That's when we built our manufacturing sector. And now's a good time to rebuild it as part of the post-war, post-pandemic reconstruction plan that I was talking about.
Okay, I think the last question is Judith from the Society. Judith?
Hi there. Thank you. Hi, Jim. In watching your presentation, you talk about looking to the government to rebuild this because the private sector just won't be able to. Do you think by going in that direction will also more fairly distribute wealth in this nation, especially where, you know, essentially, I think it's this Thompson family that has the most wealth in Canada? Will we see that as being distributed more evenly?
It can be if we make that a priority. And again, experience has been that when we expand the public sector as a share of total GDP and a share of total employment, it is good for equality, partly because, you know, public sector jobs tend to be, we fight for it, but they tend to be good jobs and have less inequality than the private sector. And also the provision of public services, which happens from the public sector, enhances the standard of living for all workers, public sector and private sector. We did see a dramatic decline in income inequality through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and that was partly because of the taxation redistribution effect, but it was mostly because we put people to work in good jobs instead of the high unemployment that we'd had in the Depression. Inequality steadily declined through that period until the advent of neoliberalism in the early 80s. And in fact, the rise of neoliberalism was motivated by the fact that rich people had lost such an important share of the wealth, and they wanted to turn that ship around, and unfortunately they have. So I think the equality angle is going to be another compelling argument as to why we can't just get back to work. We can't get back to quote unquote normal, whatever that was before the pandemic. We have a chance and a necessity to build something better now.
That's a great way of ending the presentation, Jim. You know, our old friend Marvin Novick, who helped us write the Good Jobs for All Declaration, used to say that the role of people who are researchers or involved as public intellectuals is to give ordinary working people the confidence to argue and to struggle for what they know is just. And the kind of work you're doing now, and along with the Center for Policy Alternatives is being quoted just about every day in all the newspapers, because the facts are real, and we need people like Jim that are going to help us make this happen. So his website is centerforfuturework.ca. Is that correct, Jim?
That's right. You got it, John. Thank you.
And please, you're welcome to stay, and we've going to have an interesting debate in a couple of minutes, Jim, but want to thank you very much for everything you've done and welcome you back to Canada.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good luck with the fight. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Now, you know, Jim talked about struggle, and one of the groups that's been struggling for a tremendous effort in this last period of time is the Foodsters United and the Foodora workers. We had them at our last physical delegates meeting at the IBW Hall, and I think they got a standing ovation, as I recollect. We probably heard in the news last week that Foodora, despite its parent company making a ton of money, hundreds of millions of dollars in business, they have shut down their Canadian operations. And tonight we have Bryce Sofer, who's a Foodster United organizer, and going to welcome Bryce.
Hi, can everyone hear me, please?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks so much for the solidarity. It's you know, the struggle for a better gig economy and better workers' rights is a lot easier with the support of allies. Right now, as you've detailed, there's a bittersweet feeling among us foodsters. We're buried because we've lost our jobs. We weren't given the chance to see this fight through to the end. As many of you know, we did win the right to unionize earlier this year. We are dependent contractors. We're not out there soliciting business from restaurants. We're not setting our own rates and the conditions of our work. We cannot and could not get orders without Foodora sending them to us. And now we may never get to count the union vote. It's a vote that we're fairly certain that we would have won, but we may never know. It's like when you get invested in a TV show and it gets canceled early and none of the loose ends are tied up and you're just left unsatisfied. We spent countless hours looking for people during the card signing campaign. It's hard enough to get signatures from folks when you have a set workplace, and we had to run all over the city. So many people dedicated so much work, and they may never know what the result will be, and they may never get that closure. We're bitter as well because Foodora is leaving many of us in a tough spot. It's clear to anyone looking at the big picture right now that government support during this pandemic has and will not be enough. It took so long for CERB to be adjusted to the point where a good chunk of us couriers could actually qualify. And many of us still don't. International students and non-citizens, non-permanent residents still don't get anything. And many had no choice but to work when others were able to stay safe at home. They were held hostage by this essential worker label, and now they have no income at all. There's no rent freeze. What are people expected to do? It's the same old story where those in power don't even consider lower income and working class people when they make their decisions. It's hard to imagine a sweet part of this situation, but there is one. The sweet thing is that all of us coming together as foodsters in the union drive in solidarity, we found that there was ways to support each other during this crisis that we would have never had if we hadn't started this movement. We've set up a relief fund for our members that would have been forgotten, tossed away by the government, by the powers that be. This offers them financial aid, and it pays the ability to pay their bills and keep the heat on during this very cold spring. I don't know when it will ever become nice. We partnered with Food Share Toronto to get groceries delivered to those that need them. There are 500 boxes that will be going out to those that need groceries. And we're constantly getting the word out to our members about the latest change to government aid. It never stops because these programs were so badly conceived in the outset. And speaking of that, we've been able to advocate along with our other union allies to get improvements to CERB and other programs. Finally, we also still have an incredible victory. We have set a precedent in labor law. The ruling by the Ontario Labor Board that we're not independent contractors means that the next time people go up against a lousy company like Foodora, there's already one less battle to be fought. It makes it easier if we're going to take on a company like Uber or any other type of monstrosity that pops up in the future. So still, this is the beginning of a new era. It's the wave of companies that are basically just investment vehicles whose only innovation was to find a gray area, was to exploit workers, was to circumvent labor laws. That wave is beginning to retreat, and we're on the way to winning the fight for the future. And this could have never happened without the solidarity of the labor movement in Toronto, in Canada, and around the world. And I want to give a special shout out to our comrades at the CUPW who gave us so much support in this fight and who continue to give us support. I think this just shows that in the face of this new situation, the labor movement and the solidarity it provides is more important than ever. Thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thanks, Bryce. Let's everybody give him an applause. Thank you so much, Bryce, for being with us and being part of this amazing effort. You're the perfect segue to the statement from the executive board that's come to the floor, and everybody's had that sent out to them today. And the title is called Immorality and Corporate Greed. And we're focusing of three sectors in this statement. As you know, the meatpacking sector and the horrific experience of meatpacking workers in Alberta, where over a third of the workers in the two largest meatpacking plants in Canada have come down with COVID. The tragic experience in long-term care, and particularly the role of privatized homes there, and then the action of Fedora company. So I hope that people have had a chance to look at that and will take a look at it. We're going to try and do a couple of things. We've lined up folks on two of the other sectors that are mentioned in that statement. Deborah, Tali Zaren from Service Employees and Deborah DeAngelis. And then we're going to actually go into breakout groups where you can talk a little bit about what are the most important things you think in these recommendations of Labor Council. And maybe we'll get that up on our screen while you're in your discussion groups, and then we'll come back and open the floor for some response. So why don't I start though? We're just going to give 3 or 4 minutes each to Tali and Deborah. Tali, are you on the line now?
Yes, hi everybody. It's really nice to see some familiar faces out there. And for those who don't know me, I'm Tali. I'm the director of the community care, home care sector at SEIU Healthcare. And just for clarification, so bear with me because this is the first time I'm speaking on behalf of SEIU in front of the Labor Council. I did read over the article and you wanted me to reference how this impacts within the home care sector. It just wasn't entirely clear to me, the direction.
Yeah, just 3 or 4 minutes, yeah.
Sure, yeah. So it's interesting, when I was listening to the fellow who was speaking about the Fedora and the experiences, it triggered a lot of commonalities with home care. I think home care is one of those sectors that there's constant oversight that happens. And the reason for that is that like Fedora, there is no central workplace. So these members, they have shifts via their cell phone, they go to clients' homes, they give care, and they commute around the city. And so organizing is very difficult. And what we're finding within this pandemic is getting clarity on what's actually happening on the ground floor within these home care sectors. So I know a lot of you have referenced what has been happening in LTC and retirement homes, and it's really unfortunate, and we've lost a few members as well, and it's been a very difficult time within the SEIU family. But I think what's fundamentally different about LTC and retirement home compared to home care and similar to Fedora is the lack of a central location. And that's how employers get away with a lot of the abuse that they do. And it was very, very unfortunate news to hear about Fedora shutting down especially after all the hard work of unionizing. But we see this as well within other sectors. We've seen this happen with Walmart. And like I said, it's similar within home care. Employers constantly divide and conquer and use our space to really play against us. So it's a fascinating coincidence. And I think that there's actually some work to be done in learning from the experiences of how Fedora organized so quickly amongst themselves to get the cards that they needed to get, because that's something that I think home care definitely needs to pick up on. But the other thing that I think is really interesting is within the home care sector and PPE. So when you're entering into a long-term care or within a community care, there's a lot of people around you. There's a lot of oversight, there's management, there's fellow coworkers, there's clients. Within the home care sector, it's just you. And so what we're finding is that our members who are not adequately protected because of employers not providing enough PPE or the government claiming there's not enough PPE or there is enough PPE, it's never really clear, but they're going into these homes, they're not sufficiently protected. They're finding that clients may not be completely honest with them about where they've been, or they're going into these homes and they're finding that clients have their family there and not following rules. And the lack of oversight is causing a lot of anxiety. So we'll see how this will impact home care. And we're starting to see that with a lot of our members, unfortunately quite ill. But it doesn't surprise me. And I think we find a lot of similarities between, these two organizations, especially with home care, a lot of these companies being private organizations. And just to give you one kind of off point, and then I'll pass it on. So we know that the LIN had allocated a $5 hazard pay to home care workers who wanted to go into the LTC and do some work. And so what we've seen across the sector within home care is employers taking various positions on this. Most employers within the home care sector are paying the full $5, but we have some employers who are actually profiting off of this. So profiting off of PSWs during the pandemic. So for example, Paramed Extendicare is paying members $3 out of the $5 with absolutely no explanation. And so here you see again, the lack of oversight within the government, monitoring where this funding is going, and then corporate greed, right? With these private companies.
Thanks, Tali. And just for delegates, the home care that Tali's talking about is visiting home care, where people their members are going to homes of seniors or folks who are disabled. And SEIU represents thousands of those workers, as well as the workers in the long-term care homes that we've heard so much about. They're both have been dramatically outsourced those work or restructured, starting with the Mike Harris Conservatives back in the 90s. And its competitive tendering is what undermines so many and that Tali has talked about. So Deborah DeAngelis is on the line, and UFCW. I remember when they were organizing that plant out in Alberta. I know you had some of your organizers out there. I think there was like 30 languages involved in organizing. So many people were temporary foreign workers. Just looking at our statement, if there's anything you want to draw out of the statement on the packing sector and food production, please.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you to all the delegates. Absolutely, corporate greed at its best. So yeah, the plant that you're referring to was in Brooks, Alberta. They used to have planes that would land on a landing strip right outside and bring in temporary foreign workers. And the conditions were terrible, and it took over 15 years to organize that plant. Well, you mentioned some of the tragedies that are happening today. So, COVID, out of the Cargill plant, 1,200 cases, with 921 have tested positive, and we're hearing every single day more and more cases. And closer to Toronto, an employee today, a member of UFCW Local 175 at Maple Lodge Farms in Brampton, died of COVID-19, and there are 49 that have tested positive. So, these food processing members are working every single day, putting their lives on the line, and corporate greed is really taking over and not really listening to just sound advice that could really make a difference and making these workplaces a lot safer. The federal government recently announced $77 million for food processing companies in response to the pandemic, but details of how this money will be distributed isn't clear at all. And so UFCW today launched a campaign to show support for food workers by sending a letter. And I'm just wondering if I can share my screen so everybody can see. Yes, I can. So everybody can see the campaign that I'm referring to. Let's try this. Can everybody see the campaign?
Nope, it's not up.
Nope, not yet. Okay. Well, I'm not gonna, I'll share it here with everybody later. So basically, Canada's food processing workers, UFCW, have been calling for the following measures. And this is recommended by our members, food worker advocates around the world. And basically, it's these basic provisions, ensuring that workers are able to work 2 meters or 6.5 feet apart from each other throughout their working day. Sounds common. Sounds like common sense, but it's not happening. And this is possible through modification in work organization, work scheduling, and rest breaks. Number 2, reducing the speed and the amount of product on the line to ensure 2 meters spacing between workers. Okay, and this could be achieved without eliminating any positions. Number 3, provision of adequate hand washing and stations and increasing the number of breaks so hand washing may become a routine part of the work. Number 4, ensuring regular, thorough cleaning and sanitation of the workplace, including restrooms and lunchrooms. 5, provision of appropriate PPE. And although this cannot be a substitute for appropriate spacing between workers, it is necessary in the workplace. And making arrangements for safe travel to and from the workplace to minimize the risk and exposure to COVID. And so I would really, or UFCW and our members would really appreciate if you would take the time, and I'll share the link in the group, to write to the federal government and to make sure that we amplify this message and make sure that we are at the forefront of keeping these workers safe. The fear that is right now in Alberta amongst our members, the amount of members that are critically sick and some of them who have passed away, it's a real tragedy. And of course, the employer and corporate greed is using racism to divide members. And so we don't want to see that happen. We want to make sure that we're at the forefront advocating and supporting these food workers. And I hope we can count on your support.
Thanks very much, Deborah. And we will, if we can put up the link to your campaign, we'll put that up. And you'll see you've got it ufcw.ca. But we'll send the link out through our next G-Blast as well to all of our thousands and thousands of members that are part of our community. So now Susan is going to lead us into, we're going to have a few minutes for you to be able to talk in small groups. This is the wonders of tech. Did this with our Climate Justice Network meeting a couple of weeks ago. It actually works well. And Susan, do you want to just explain how we're going to do this?
Sure, thanks, John. Everybody in a minute, when I start up the breakout rooms, is going to get a message on your screen that asks you to join a breakout group. It's randomized, so you're going to end up in a room with, people you know or people who you don't know. We think that we'll have the discussion for about 8 or 9 minutes. In a minute, I'm going to put up the recommendations from let me just see if I can get them up here now, actually. There we are. I'm going to put the recommendations up.
Just keep explaining what you're doing.
There we are. Yep.
Yeah.
Got to try and think and do and talk at the same time. And we'll also put these into the chat function, so you'll be able to refer to them. And then the idea is that in your group, you'll be able to talk about different ways that you think one of these may be important. After we bring you out of the breakout groups, and that will happen automatically, you'll get a little message about a minute before they end. We're going to be asking some people if they want to speak on the issues, but we also invite you to use the chat function to have that conversation. So I'm going to put you into the breakout rooms now, and you're going to need to join them. Off you go. Have a good time. About 8 minutes.
Okay, well,
We're back.
Hey, we're back.
Okay.
Okay, we're coming back into the main session now.
Reminder to everybody to self-mute now that we're back in the main session.
Right.
Okay, we've got a couple minutes we can take for any comments on the statement as a whole. Is there anybody that wants to speak? Just put your hand up or press star. You get star 9 on your cell phone if you're joining by phone. Anybody wants to speak on the statement as a whole? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. I guess I hope you had a good discussion.
Sorry, John, I see Judith's hand up and then Grace.
Judith and then Grace. So, Judith, go ahead.
Hi, in we had Jonathan in our breakout group and sort of got cut off to come back. I love those breakout rooms, but his point was that all of those are important, but the biggest challenge we have is the big businesses, especially when it comes to, we're talking about the meat plants and the exports to China, and how do you support and slow down that work for the safety of the workers, and especially those on the killing floor, because the killing floor, as I understand it, is not in Cargill, was not inspected by the Department of Labor, but the line was, but the killing floor was exempt, and that's where they can't social distance. So, you know, we need to support all of those initiatives, but we need to be strategic in working with and lobbying the government, because we are fighting the big business and the big foreign trade and the GDP and all that other kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely. And of course, with Alberta, with the Jason Kenney government, they're attacking unions all the time, and they're gutting labor law that was there, and they're directing inspectors to not thoroughly inspect those kinds of workplaces. Grace from Local 113. Unmute.
Hey there. Just a slight summary of a few things mentioned in our breakout group. Jeff had mentioned that right now Doug Ford is looking like a star to a lot of people in the media, just with some of the things that he's saying and how he's being crafted and supported in what it is that he's saying. But not for us to take our sight off the fact that as things start to open up to the community, he's going to start passing the blame. And most definitely a lot of that blame is going to come towards the workers, and even more specifically, the union workers. Miguel in our breakup group also made comments that now more than ever, we need to be stronger together. The unions definitely need to unite. We're harder to break down when we're standing together versus when we're spread apart. So that can be a message that we can all individually carry back to our respective workplaces and spread amongst our fellow members and coworkers, just so that people are aware, like, this is one storm that we're in now, but it's only going to continue to be a storm of other aftermaths going forward as we try to recover as an economy from what's currently taking place.
Is there anybody else that wants to speak to this statement? If not, we're going to go to a vote on the statement, and we'll simply take the vote in favor or opposed or abstain. Oh, sorry, Carlos, I see that you were wanted to speak. If you want to say a few words now.
Yeah, I just want to say, is there any mention about Ministry of Labor investigations? Maybe we can put something in there that they actually have to go to the facility and do investigations, because a lot of Ministry of Labor investigations right now, they don't even show up to like long-term care homes, or even at our location, the TTC. They just investigate by the phone. So maybe just something to consider, if not in this statement, in a future statement.
For sure. Yep.
Okay.
We know that that those, when the Ford government came in, one of the things they did was say to Ministry of Labor inspectors that you shouldn't be spending your time going to workplaces. Just go and talk to the boss and ask them how it's going. And I think your point, and I know that ATU members have had very bitter experiences about trying to exercise their rights. So thanks very much. Are we done the vote? Okay, that motion motion is carried. And I'm looking to see what we're doing next, which is the United Way. Marcia Lopez from the Labor Community Services is going to talk to us about this very, very important campaign the United Way is putting up. And as people know, United Way is our charity of choice. So Marcia, if you're on the line now, and we'll put up the slides for you.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you for the time to speak with the delegates tonight to bring some good news about what's happening at the United Way. In March, the United Way launched what they're calling their Local Love Fund, which supports the frontline needs of agencies across the GTA who are caring for our most vulnerable people during the COVID-19 crisis. Needs on the ground are rapidly changing, as we have heard today, and our community agencies will have different needs as the hours and days pass. Funds will be used for a variety of changing needs, and they are best positioned to deploy these resources. So we are in regular contact with the people in the community agencies, and United Way staff work together to direct donations to where they are needed most. Right now, the following needs are priorities. Help for seniors to ensure that while isolated, they are also supported. 2, basic needs to ensure isolated people have access to food, supplies, etc. 3, mental health support to ensure a continuum of supports from soft reach outs to distress and crisis supports. 4, support for volunteers to ensure that they can work with the network of agencies to meet needs in a coordinated, safe way. And 5th, capacity for community services to ensure that they can continue to do their vital work and reach out to the most isolated. How does it work? How does the fund work? Well, United Way will act as a hub for coordinating the sector's needs overall. Community agencies will determine needs on the ground and implement interventions that they determine are needed. United Way will take in funds from all sources, including other organizations with whom they partner with that will fundraise on their own. United Way will also flow funds to our existing United Way agency network, who have been all vetted and meet United Way standards for effective programming, along with the financial and reporting rigor. For those donors and accounts who wish to have a regional or national impact, United Way will flow funds to other United Ways for the purpose described above. United Way's current fund ratio is 17%, and we expect that this will remain unchanged. So again, United Way is using the funds in a very efficient way. United Way will report to donors the amount of funds distributed and to which agencies for the purpose described below. If you would like to know what to do and how you can help, you will see on the screen, Susan has posted up how you can help and how you can donate to the fund. The Labor Council has made a donation, and they've also sent out a letter of appeal to all heads of unions and has posted that letter on their website. And that is a way that we all can help in this time of need. Not to forget that you can always tell your members about the 211 number that they can call to see where services are available in their neighborhood and in their community. It's a very important service that United Way funds at 100%. So that's another important thing to remember. And you could always get all of the information online at the United Way website. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Marcia. And you know, many of the social service agencies in the GTA are unionized, and Marcia Faduma Mohammed from LCS met, I think yesterday, with a number of the union reps from those different social service agencies. We know that they're facing funding challenges, and that's why the Local Love campaign is so important. So we've sent a letter to every local union president, heads of unions in the GTA, asking every local union to step up and make a special donation at this point in time when we know so many people are going through such a tough time. So Abdi Hagi Yusuf, our secretary, is actually breaking fast right now. It's Ramadan. So we do have two motions for you under correspondence, and we'll actually go to the first one, which is that the Labor Council donate $500 to the United Way Local Love campaign. And if we can put that vote up. And ask people to vote. And in a minute, I'm going to ask Josh ready to make his report, the CLC report. The second motion in front of us, if we're finished with that first motion, yep, is for us to donate $100 to the Foodsters United emergency fund for the Fedora workers who've just losing their jobs this week. And so we can put that vote up. That's $100 donation. We'll also share with our affiliates and on our website a way that you can your union can also donate to the Foodsters emergency fund. Vote on that. And then while we're waiting for that vote report, Josh, can you bring yourself up on the screen and start getting ready for the presentation?
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to quickly share my screen for this report here. Give me a sec to... All right. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's so nice to be here and see so many of you. It really feels like community to get to be able to do this today. Quickly, CLC report. You know, we're just coming off a day of mourning last week. There are about 36 labor councils across the province. Most of them are quite small and have limited resources. And you know, labor councils put on amazing day of mourning events year after year, but unfortunately, they had to be, you know, digital events, and that conversion took a little bit of time, but some great work was done, including this labor council, which had two ceremonies, one for York and one for Toronto. But overall, the day of mourning across the province, there were a dozen live events using Zoom, and the CLC provided some expertise with that and helped facilitate on the back end. There were 14 social media digital day of mourning videos. People like Don Guest from Brantford actually went and put a wreath at a local memorial by himself, posted the video. Other actions included surveys. Grey Bruce had a cavalcade of cars running down the main street. There was a coloring activity for children that Hamilton did. So great work by labor activists across the province. Just want to mention a few campaigns. The biggest one right now that we're pushing hard is credit card relief. You know, banks continue to burden people who need help. It's pretty messed up, right? I mean, we're all on a virtual lockdown. Families across the country have lost primary sources of income. And you know, the Bank of Canada, they reduced their lending rate to historically low levels for banks to borrow. But guess what? Banks also made $46 billion, but they're not passing that on. So we are urging them to do that. You can check out that campaign at canadianlabour.ca/takeaction. It wouldn't be a CLC report if we didn't talk about pharmacare, but of course, pharmacare plays a prominent role, especially in this pandemic. Right now, what's going on is that the Canadian Pharmacy Association, they have made a decision that affects pharmacies across the country to take the 90-day refill policy and move it to 30 days. So if you use prescription drugs, you would typically go to your local Shoppers or Rexall. You would then, you know, you renew that prescription 90 days, 3 months later. they've changed that to make it 30 days. I mean, and some of the reasoning behind that is said to be so that we reduce any possible drug shortages. The problem with that, of course, that is now that you have those dispensing fees monthly as opposed to every 3 months. So it totally really impacts people on fixed incomes. We're talking seniors, people living with disabilities. So that's a big problem. Also, it's kind of weird, right? We all talk about isolation, self-isolation. You're now taking vulnerable people who need that medication, who have underlying health issues, and you're sending them to a pharmacy, which might have other people who need medication because of COVID or whatever. So it's kind of it's a policy that needs to be changed. We want to waive those fees. You can again check out canadianlabour.ca/take action. I just want to quickly talk about long-term care. It's obviously an issue that everyone's looking at. I have an aunt who contracted COVID, and she does a lot of work in long-term care. So there were virtual meetings that took place between the CLC leadership and then the leadership of some of the affiliates who represent healthcare workers. And so there's going to be a campaign that's launching soon. Hopefully we'll hear more from a Canadian Council meeting on Friday. But basically the campaign is to say, hey, long-term care needs to be in the public system, and it needs to be regulated according to the principles of the Canadian Health Act. So that's a campaign that's coming soon. Other than that, we've been inundating your email inboxes with tons of webinars. I just want to flag one that's coming up, which is President Hassan is going to have a webinar this Tuesday, May 12th, 1 p.m. It's basically, what's Labor's plan, or starting the conversation for the plan for recovery and what Labor feels about that. I just want to also mention Toronto High Capacity does all these great meetings, but we've been working with other Labor councils across the province to kind of help them move forward with their meetings. Many of them, feel that it's a little difficult for them to move forward with meetings. So we've been working with them to get them, trained up digitally on how to do these things. So hopefully I might even try to invite a president or two to the next Toronto meeting so that they can see how they can actually do this kind of work. Last thing I just want to say, we do have a new website that launched last year, but we have a specific CLC COVID web portal, and there's a lot of great resources there talking about the CERB, talks about all the campaigns that we're working on, but also just there's a ton of links, including there's a section where you can actually see the pages, every page of every affiliate, so that if you were a steelworker, you needed a quick reference on how to see what Steel's doing regarding COVID, you can access that straight from the CLC website. That's it.
Thanks very much, John. Next, we have committee reports, and start with Equity Committee, and if there's any other committees, make your report. Equity Committee, and then we're going to head to local union reports.
Yes, good evening, everybody. It's Rav Chatur, Society of United Professionals. We had a really good meeting today. We expect to see a survey coming your way. It will go to your various committees, and the question on the survey would be geared towards the COVID-19 effects that exacerbate differential treatment towards workers of color and Indigenous people. That's one thing. Because of the limitations that COVID's put on us, we're going to substitute iWalk this year. We're being creative, and we creating a podcast. So that's in the works. And we spent a fair bit of time talking about self-care and how we could best serve members, because the requirements of providing support and representation for our members takes on a different complexion in this environment in which we communicate in by technology. So those are the highlights. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Any other committees to report? If not, we'll go to reports of local unions.
Sorry, Laura Thompson has her hand up.
Okay, so go ahead, Laura.
Hi, Laura Thompson, Officer Local 503, reporting on the Women's Committee. Really just a quick report. The bulk of our conversation was talking about COVID-19, obviously in the context of our workplaces, our locals, and serving our members, but also looking at it a gender lens and the way that we're living in a moment where so much of what's allowing our society to survive is with what's traditionally been women's work, or is what's traditionally considered women's work. And as a result, like a lot of women's work is not given the proper recognition, which is something we're seeing with a lot of the PSWs in some of our private long-term healthcare homes. As opposed to, in terms of going forward, obviously, or in past years, this is about around the time we would look to be offering such as a roundtable. Obviously, at this time, that can't go forward, but we're looking potentially at whether it's the fall is an option, with the hope that at that time, gathering in groups will be safe and we can do kind of our more what we've done more traditionally. But if not, looking at Zoom or other online options that might be appropriate and still kind of give the feeling of solidarity and sisterhood. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, reports of local unions. Is there anybody that wants to report? Just put your hand up, or and maybe while we're waiting, I'll ask Marc-Edouard Joubert, our good friend from Montreal, if there's, I'm catching him off guard. I didn't tell him I was going to ask him, but if there's anything he wants to say about what's their experience in the labor movement in Quebec. And we will start live with the video that we're going to show you. We're waiting for that. Okay, might have caught people unaware. So I don't see any local unions that are wanting to report. So
hello, John.
Yes, Marc-Edouard.
John, did you wanted me to intervene in the meeting? Is that?
Yeah, sure. I'd invite you
Okay.
to share any thoughts you have with our delegates.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. Well, actually, thank you very much and for the opportunity to react to the reports and to the meetings, to the meeting tonight. Thank you very much. Well, actually, in Montreal, well, in Quebec, as you well know, the epidemic has taken a great toll of on the society in general. So actually, for the labor movement, the struggle is within our people into two separate sectors of activity. One of them is, of course, the healthcare system, more specifically, the long-term healthcare facilities for elderly people. There are 2,600 of them within the province of Quebec, and 92% of the fatalities have taken place into such houses, either public or private. Of course, as union leaders, we're mostly against abuses that have taken places into private owned healthcare facilities, because as you well know, healthcare is not, I would actually a sector of activity that should not be moving towards profit, but should be moving toward respecting the dignity of our elderly people, and of course, on the same breath, out of our people working toward providing health. I don't like to say services. I'd like to, en français, on dit de prendre soin, taking care of our elderly people. So this is a big fight. Actually, yesterday, I reacted quite, for people who know me, I'm usually a very calm individual, quite big physically, but very calm. But yesterday I was not all that calm, and I reacted badly to an habit that our Prime Minister has taken every day, as Rob Ford is doing. I'm watching him sometimes, unfortunately, I have to. Every day, our Premier opens up his address at 1 in the afternoon by stating the specific thing that I'm going to share with you. Today we're missing, and today the number was, today we're missing 11,400 people into the healthcare system. So that explains why we have so much problem, blah, 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 blah. And we do react very badly to such allegations. Of course, he's not saying that because of the workers we're in the mess we're in, but implicitly, this is what he's trying to get people to understand. And I made a public, how would I say, a public statement, as some other leaders did, explaining to the premier that the reason why we're missing so many people, first of all, 1/3 of that number that is stating are presently in quarantine, imposed by the same government that is stating that people are missing. So that's about 3,000 and some more people. And the other 7,000 that are not showing up because they are not given the conditions of work to prevent their health and safety, basically. I've had numerous, and I'm sure in Ontario the same thing, numerous examples of very, very sad stories and stories that are actually costing lives. It's not only being sick with a cough, as we understand, this is a very serious illness. And we've had stories of young workers getting on, young nurses starting at the job and getting on a new floor where people had COVID and being told by the authorities, you're not getting any protection because you're not part of the regular team. But what kind of nonsense is that? I'm taking care of people. Who cares if somebody is part of a regular team? Give me the proper protection. So now people realize that since they're not sure of getting the proper protection to operate and to help people that are being sick, well, a lot of them, and we have to admit it, are scared for their lives, literally for their lives. They're not scared to be sick 3 days. They're not being lazy like people try to pretend. They're scared of contacting COVID, transmitting it to their kids, transmitting it to their spouses. And this is a big problem that we're having right now.
That's something we have on both in Ontario and Quebec, which have the highest levels of COVID.
Exactly. So, and I don't want to take up too much time, and I will finish with this. School, another catastrophe in the making. The schools are supposed to open in the entire province of Quebec on May 11th. In Montreal, they were supposed to open on the 19th. Now the government today has moved back another week to May 25th. And the reason being is very simple. Most of the parents that I know do not want to send their kids back to school. Not in those conditions. And I have personally 2 grown-ups in their 20s that are not affected by it, but most of the people that I talk to have very much younger kids. And in Quebec, what has been decided, it's not like you guys decided to wait, I think, until not before June, or if it's even considered to come back in June, I'm not sure. But in Quebec, they have opened them on May 11th, which is next Monday. And more than half of the parents won't send their kids to school. And I would say a good portion of the teachers are very scared, especially those who are over 60-year-old. As you very well know too, most of our drivers for buses are elderly people. I would say people over the age of 70. Yeah,
school buses.
School buses.
Yeah.
And this is another thing that is not being taken into consideration. So I don't want to go into extensive and talk for too long, but into the of course, what we realize with la CAQ is that they're minding, the neoliberalism minding is to put the economy before everything else. They pretend that they care about the health and safety of people, but in the decision that they're making, you can see that they are pressured by les patrons, the
bosses, yeah.
The bosses to reopen big, because contrary to Ontario, Quebec did close the construction sector. It has been reopened as of May 4th for residential construction, but all the industrials, big commercial construction has not reopened yet. And there's a lot of pressure regarding this sector of activities, like many others. So basically,
Rod,
this is what's going on.
Yes, thank you very much for that.
My pleasure, my
for
pleasure.
Being with us tonight and sharing that. We are all heartbroken when we turn on the news every night and see how many people are passing in Quebec. But for those who don't know, our labor councils have a formal partnership on Labor Council that we put together some years ago, and Marc Edouard is the president who is leading that great council these days. I do have one final speaker, Carlos from ATU1. You're going to have to unmute yourself, Carlos.
All right. Yeah. How's it going, everyone? Thanks for having me. I'll give you a quick report. We have Transdev workers, 400 in York region that were doing contract negotiations. The contracts expired, and everybody knows about the 1,000 ATU members that are potentially being laid off due to funding. So we have been sending letters to all MPs, MPPs. We've been trying to lobby all different groups to try and get them to stop this. I'm encouraging everybody to go on to sign up on that TTC Riders petition. It's a petition called Keep Transit Moving. I did see the mayor today asking for funding, for city funding. So that was nice to see on TV today that they're actually now asking the provincial and the federal government for funding. So yeah, it's been an ongoing battle, this COVID-19. Not only have we had to fight for PPE, but on top of that, we have 32 of our members that have got COVID-19. We've also got 9 other members that are non-union that have COVID. So 41 now at the TTC. Not only are we fighting this virus that is unknown and potentially fatal, but we're also now facing pink slips, which is quite shameful. And we know that the governments have always tried to take unions down, but at the end of the day, what they don't realize, they're hurting the public, right? The same people that are needing to go to work and needing to ride public transit are going to be affected. So you're not just hurting the public transit as far as the workers, you're also hurting citizens of Toronto that depend on public transit every day. So it's pretty sad that it's come to this, but at the end of the day, we're going to do our best to stop it. And I want to thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Carlos. And the link to the petition that Carlos mentioned was in the e-blast that went out on Tuesday. So go back and find that, and you'll see it is Keep Transit Moving. Please go there and sign the petition. The Labour Council today sent letters to every member of Parliament in Toronto demanding that they step up and fund our public transit so we can keep Toronto moving and York Region moving. So, there's some tough stories that we've had, but we wanted to end last month. We ended with Solidarity Forever. Jennifer Wong found this great video, and we wanted to end by sharing this wonderful video with you, sisters and brothers.
Virus again, then I'll go to bed.
But my boy, you're growing weary, sleepy thoughts about your head.
Please, that one's my favourite. I promise just once more.
Okay, snuggle down, my boy, though I know you know full well. The story starts before then, in a world I once would dwell. It was a world of waste and wonder, of poverty and plenty, back before we understood why hindsight's 2020. You see, the people came up with companies to trade across all lands, but they swelled and got much bigger than we ever could have planned. We'd always had our wants, but now it got so quick. You could have anything you dreamed of in a day, and with a click. We noticed families had stopped talking. That's not to say they never spoke, but the meaning must have melted, and the work-life balance broke. And the children's eyes grew squarer, and every toddler had a phone. They filtered out the imperfections, but amidst the noise, they felt alone. And every day the skies grew thicker, till you couldn't see the stars. So we flew in planes to find them, while down below, we filled our cars. We'd drive around all day in circles. We'd forgotten how to run. We swapped the grass for tarmac, shrunk the parks till there were none. We filled the sea with plastic, because our waste was never capped, until each day when you went fishing, you'd pull them out, already wrapped. And while we drank and smoked and gambled, our leaders taught us why. It's best to not upset the lobbies. More convenient to die. But then in 2020, a new virus came our way. The governments reacted and told us all to hide away. But while we all were hidden, amidst the fear and all the while, people dusted off their instincts. They remembered how to smile. They started clapping to say thank you and calling up their mums. And while the car keys gathered dust, they would look forward to their runs. And with the skies less full of voyagers, the earth began to breathe, and the beaches bore new wildlife that scuttled off into the seas. Some people started dancing, some were singing, some were baking. We'd grown so used to bad news, but some good news was in the making. And so when we found the cure, and were allowed to go outside, we all preferred the world we found to the one we'd left behind. Old habits became extinct, and they made way for the new, and every simple act of kindness was now given its due.
But why did it take a virus to bring the people back together?
Well, sometimes you've got to get sick, my boy, before you start feeling better. Now lie down and dream of tomorrow, and all the things that we can do. And who knows, if you dream hard enough, maybe some of them will come true. We now call it the Great Realization. And yes, since then there have been many. But that's the story of how it started, and why hindsight's 2020.
Because if you look at the
Thank you, sisters and brothers. We'll share that on our social media as well. Safe, and we'll keep strong and working for a better Canada and a better world. Thanks all. Be safe.
Bonsoir.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Great meeting.
Bye, Blair.
Take care, Susan. Have a good night. Be safe.
You too.
Stay safe, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, all. Good night.
Good night, Doug.
Susan, can you pass the host back to me so I can cancel the live stream?
Yes. Give me a minute.
He says they can't leave.
Hold on just a minute. No.
I've just started to put people